How Children Succeed: Grit, Curiosity, and the Hidden Power of Character, by Paul Tough. Introduction. I want to tell you a story about a girl named Quanah Lerma. When she was in 6th grade, she got into so much trouble that she was put in the slow class. She skipped school, talked back to teachers, and got into fights. By the time she was a teenager, she'd been arrested for scuffling with a police officer. If you looked at her life on paper, you'd think her story was already written. Another sad tale of a kid born into poverty, with an unsettled childhood, bouncing from one home to another, and headed for the same struggles her parents faced. The odds were stacked against her. By all conventional measures, she was on a path to failure. But then, something changed. One day, her mother sat her down and said 5 words that would alter the course of her life. "I don't want you to end up like me." It was a long, difficult conversation, full of tears and painful truths. Quanah didn't cry. She just listened. And when she went back to school, she started to pay attention. She pulled away from her old friends and started doing her homework. Her grade point average, which had been a miserable 1.8 at the end of her freshman year, climbed to a 3.4 by the middle of her sophomore year. By the time she was a junior, it was 4.2, and she wasn't wondering if she would go to college, but which college she would go to. So what happened? What was the secret ingredient that allowed Quanah to completely rewrite her own story? Was it just one conversation, or was there something deeper at play? This question is at the very heart of a remarkable book by Paul Tough titled, How Children Succeed. This isn't just a book about education, it's a book about the hidden mechanics of a successful life. It has reshaped how parents, teachers, and scientists think about what it truly takes to thrive in the world. Today, we're going to journey through its pages. And I promise you, by the end of our time together, you'll understand the profound, and often surprising, science of success. You'll learn why the things we've been told matter most, like intelligence and test scores, are only a small part of the picture. And you'll discover the hidden tools that allow ordinary people, like Quanah, to achieve extraordinary things. This isn't just about how children succeed, it's about how we succeed. Book summary. For decades, we've been living under the spell of a powerful idea. We might call it the cognitive hypothesis. It's the belief that success in life depends almost entirely on cognitive skills, the kind of intelligence measured by IQ tests. The ability to recognize letters, calculate numbers, and spot patterns. This idea tells us that the best way to ensure a child's success is to start as early as possible, cramming their little brains with as much academic information as we can. It's the reason for the rugrat race, with tutoring centers for 2-year-olds and a frantic competition for spots in the best preschools. This hypothesis is neat and tidy. It makes sense. More practice equals better skills. More math worksheets mean better math scores. But over the last couple of decades, a quiet revolution has been taking place in labs and classrooms across the country. A group of economists, psychologists, and neuroscientists have been gathering evidence that tells a very different story. They've found that what truly matters most isn't just cognitive skill. It's a different set of qualities, a set of non-cognitive skills that we often refer to as character. Qualities like persistence, self-control, curiosity, conscientiousness, grit, and optimism. One of the most unlikely pioneers of this new way of thinking is an economist from the University of Chicago named James Heckman. Heckman is a brilliant academic who won the Nobel Prize for complex statistical analysis. For most of his career, like many economists, he believed that cognitive ability was the single most important factor in a person's life outcome. But then he stumbled upon a puzzle that he couldn't solve. He was studying the GED program, the test that allows high school dropouts to get a credential equivalent to a diploma. The program was built on the cognitive hypothesis: if you have the knowledge and smarts of a high school graduate, you shouldn't need to waste your time in class. You can just pass a test and move on. And when Heckman looked at the data, he found that, on paper, GED holders were just as smart as high school graduates. Their scores on achievement tests, which are closely related to IQ, were identical. But when he looked at their lives after getting the GED, the picture was completely different. GED holders weren't at all like high school graduates. Their annual incomes, unemployment rates, and even divorce rates were almost identical to those of high school dropouts. Only 3% of them had finished some kind of post-secondary degree by age 22, compared to 46% of high school graduates. This was a profound mystery. Here was a group of people who were certifiably smart, yet their intelligence seemed to have no positive effect on their lives. What were they missing? Heckman concluded that the missing ingredient was character. The high school graduates had demonstrated qualities that the GED holders lacked: the ability to persist at a boring task, the tendency to follow through on a plan, and the self-control to delay gratification. These non-cognitive skills, it turned out, were incredibly valuable in college, in the workplace, and in life. This discovery sent Heckman on a new path, and it led him to re-examine a famous experiment from the 1960s called the Perry Preschool Project. In Ypsilanti, Michigan, researchers had provided a high-quality preschool program to a group of low-income, low IQ 3- and 4-year-olds. The experiment had long been considered a failure because, while the kids' IQ scores went up during preschool, those gains faded away by the third grade. But when researchers looked at the long-term data, they saw something amazing. The Perry kids, now in their 40s, were doing much better in life than the control group who hadn't attended the preschool. They were more likely to have graduated from high school, more likely to be employed, and were earning significantly more money. They had been arrested less and spent less time on welfare. The preschool had worked, but not in the way anyone expected. It hadn't made them permanently smarter, but it had given them something else. Heckman dug into the old data and found teacher reports from elementary school that had never been analyzed. These reports rated the children on things like personal behavior and social development, things like curiosity and self-control. He discovered that it was the development of these non-cognitive skills that accounted for the vast majority of the program's long-term benefits. The Perry Preschool hadn't succeeded by raising intelligence. It had succeeded by building character. And for those kids from Ypsilanti, character turned out to be the key to a better life. So if character is so important, where does it come from? And what happens when it's not there? To understand that, we have to look at another, much darker side of childhood. Halfway across the country from James Heckman's office, a pediatrician named Nadine Burke Harris was grappling with a similar puzzle, but from a completely different angle. She had opened a clinic in Bayview Hunters Point, one of the poorest and most violent neighborhoods in San Francisco. She came in with a standard public health playbook: improve access to care, manage asthma, give vaccinations. And she was successful at it. But she had a nagging feeling that she was only treating the symptoms, not the root cause of the health disparities she saw every day. Her young patients were surrounded by violence and chaos, and it was taking a profound toll on them. They were anxious, depressed, and traumatized. She felt less like a doctor and more like a battlefield surgeon, patching up kids only to send them back into a war zone. Her search for answers led her to a groundbreaking piece of research called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or the ACEs study. In the 1990s, researchers at Kaiser Permanente and the CDC asked over 17,000 middle-class, mostly white, college-educated adults about their childhoods. They asked about 10 categories of adversity, including physical and emotional abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction like having a parent who was an alcoholic or incarcerated. The results were stunning. First, childhood trauma was incredibly common, even in this well-off population. 2/3 of the patients had at least one ACEs. But the truly shocking discovery came when they compared the ACE scores with the patient's medical histories. The correlation between a difficult childhood and negative adult health outcomes was powerful and undeniable. It followed what scientists call a dose-response relationship. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health. A person with an ACE score of 4 or higher was 7 times more likely to be an alcoholic and twice as likely to have cancer or heart disease. An adult with an ACE score above 6 was 30 times more likely to have attempted suicide. This wasn't just about people with traumatic pasts engaging in self-destructive behaviors like smoking or drinking. Even when researchers controlled for those behaviors, the health risks remained alarmingly high. A high ACE score seemed to cause damage directly, through a biological pathway that had nothing to do with behavior. The adversity they experienced as children was, quite literally, getting under their skin and making them sick as adults. For Drive. Burke Harris, reading this study was a moment of revelation. It explained what she was seeing in her clinic every day. But how did it work? What was the mechanism? The answer, scientists have now reached a consensus on, is stress. Our bodies have a sophisticated system for managing stress, called the HPA axis. Think of it like a high-tech firehouse. When a threat appears, a lion on the savannah, or in modern times, a looming deadline, the alarm bell rings, and the system sends out a cascade of stress hormones. Your heart rate increases, your senses sharpen, and your body prepares to fight or flee. This is a brilliant system for handling brief, acute emergencies. But here's the problem: our bodies haven't evolved to deal with the chronic, psychological stress of modern life, worrying about rent, dealing with a chaotic home life, or living in a dangerous neighborhood. When the fire alarm is constantly ringing, day after day, the system gets overloaded. The neuroscientist Bruce McEwen calls this gradual wear and tear allostatic load. It's like sending out the entire fleet of fire trucks, sirens blaring, for every single false alarm. Eventually, the trucks start to break down, and the constant chaos does more damage than the fires ever could. For a child growing up in a chronically stressful environment, this overload has devastating consequences. It affects the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for what we call executive functions. Think of executive functions as the air traffic control system for your brain. They help you regulate your emotions, control your impulses, stay focused, and follow directions. When this system is compromised by stress, it's harder to sit still, harder to concentrate, and harder to rebound from disappointment. It's hard to learn the alphabet when you're overwhelmed by anxiety and negative feelings. We see this play out in the stories of 2 teenagers from Chicago. Monisha Sullivan was abandoned by her mother at birth and spent her adolescence bouncing through 9 different foster homes. The stress she endured turned inward, manifesting as anxiety, insomnia, trembling hands, and a constant feeling that the world was about to end. For her, the fire alarm was always on, and the damage from the constant response left her feeling, as she put it, damaged forever. Then there was a boy named Thomas Gaston, known as Mush. He also grew up with unrelenting stress, including witnessing his uncle's murder when he was just 9 years old. But unlike Monisha, Mush turned his stress outward. He got into fights, acted up in class, and eventually started breaking the law. The pain he felt, especially after his brother was killed, was like a ticking time bomb. Gangbanging became the only way he could clear his mind. Both Monisha and Mush were victims of the same biological process. Their early adversity had overloaded their stress response systems, damaging the parts of their brains responsible for self-regulation. For one, it led to internalizing disorders like anxiety. For the other, externalizing behaviors like aggression. This all sounds incredibly bleak, doesn't it? It feels like a story of predetermined failure, where a difficult childhood writes a script of struggle that's impossible to escape. But what if I told you there's an antidote? A protective buffer so powerful it can shield a child from many of the worst effects of a stressful environment. And this antidote doesn't come from a pharmacy or a government program. It comes from parents. The key to this discovery lies with a neuroscientist at McGill University named Michael Meany and his fascinating research with rats. Scientists in Meany's lab noticed something curious. When they would handle baby rats, or pups, some of the mother rats, or dams, would scurry over and spend a few minutes licking and grooming their stressed-out babies. Other dams would just ignore them. This seemingly small act had a profound physiological effect. The licking and grooming calmed the pups down, counteracting the flood of stress hormones. Meany's team then discovered that some mothers were naturally high licking and grooming high LG, while others were low LG. They decided to see what long-term effects this difference in parenting style might have. The results were astonishing. The pups who received a lot of licking and grooming grew up to be fundamentally different rats. They were bolder, more curious, more social, and less aggressive. They were better at mazes, had better self-control, were healthier, and even lived longer. And it wasn't genetic. When they switched pups at birth, putting the biological offspring of a low LG mother with a high LG mother, what mattered was the parenting they received, not the genes they were born with. The nurturing care of the rearing mother completely overrode their genetic predisposition. This nurturing attention had fostered a resilience in the pups, acting as a protective buffer against stress. Even more remarkably, Meany found that this early experience went all the way down to the level of their DNA, literally switching on the gene that controlled how their brains process stress hormones in adulthood. And here's where it connects back to us. Researchers are finding compelling evidence that something very similar happens in humans. Psychologists call it attachment. Developed in the 1950s and 60s, attachment theory proposed that babies who have warm, sensitive, and responsive parents develop a secure base from which they can confidently explore the world. A landmark study in Minnesota followed 267 low-income mothers and their children from birth into their late 30s. It found that a child's attachment status at 1 year of age was a powerful predictor of a huge range of outcomes later in life. Children who were securely attached as infants were more socially competent in preschool, formed closer friendships in middle school, and were better able to navigate the complex social world of adolescence. They were also much more likely to graduate from high school. In fact, researchers found they could predict with 77% accuracy which children would drop out of high school based only on the quality of their early parenting, ignoring all other factors like IQ or test scores. Just like the high LG rat mothers, responsive human parents seem to buffer their children from the damaging effects of a stressful environment. Researchers like Clancy Blair and Gary Evans have shown that when mothers are highly responsive and attuned to their children's emotional needs, the negative biological impact of things like poverty, family turmoil, and chaos almost completely disappears. Regular, good parenting, being attentive during a game of Jenga, for instance, can make a profound difference. The most hopeful part of this research is that these parenting skills can be taught. Even in families with documented histories of child maltreatment, interventions like child-parent psychotherapy have been shown to dramatically increase the rates of secure attachment. One study showed a jump from just one securely attached infant out of 137 at the start to 61% after a year of therapy. The cycle of poor attachment can be broken. This brings us to one of the central arguments of Paul Tough's book. If we want to improve the lives of children, especially those facing adversity, one of the most powerful levers we have is the development of character. When David Levin started the first KIPP Middle School in the South Bronx, the mission was clear: climb the mountain to college. His first graduating class in 1999 was a huge success story. These students, almost all from low-income families, posted the highest test scores in the Bronx and the fifth highest in all of New York City. It seemed like they were on a clear path to success. But then, the mountain got steeper. While most of the students made it through high school and enrolled in college, many of them started to stumble. 6 years after high school graduation, only 21% had actually completed a 4-year degree. Levin was heartbroken. He had given these kids everything he thought they needed. What had gone wrong? As he looked at the students who did succeed in college, he noticed something curious. They weren't always the ones who had been the academic superstars at KIPP. Instead, they were the ones who possessed other qualities: optimism, resilience, and social agility. They were the students who could bounce back from a bad grade, who could persuade a professor to give them extra help, and who could resist the temptation to go out with friends when they needed to study. Levin realized that KIPP had been focusing on academics, but it was these character strengths that were making the difference. This led him on a quest, and he connected with a group of psychologists who were trying to create a science of good character. Two of them, Martin Seligman and Christopher Peterson, had created a list of 24 character strengths they believed were universally valued across all cultures and all of history. These weren't fixed traits you were born with. They were skills you could learn, practice, and teach. Working with Levin and another educator, Dominic Randolph from the prestigious Riverdale Country School, they narrowed the list down to 7 strengths that seemed especially critical for success: grit, self-control, zest, social intelligence, gratitude, optimism, and curiosity. Let's look at a couple of these. One of the key researchers in this area is Angela Duckworth, a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania. She became fascinated with the idea of self-discipline. In one study, she measured the self-discipline and IQ of 8th graders and found that self-discipline was a better predictor of their final grades than IQ. Her work connected to a famous experiment from the 1960s called the marshmallow test. A researcher would offer a 4-year-old a marshmallow and tell them they could eat it now, or, if they waited 15 minutes until the researcher returned, they could have 2 marshmallows. It was a simple test of delayed gratification. But years later, the results were incredible. The kids who were able to wait for the second marshmallow had SAT scores that were, on average, 210 points higher than the kids who couldn't wait. The most successful kids used clever tricks to distract themselves. They sang songs, covered their eyes, or even took a nap. They were teaching themselves a fundamental skill: how to manage their impulses to achieve a long-term goal. But as Duckworth continued her research, she realized that self-control wasn't the whole story. She looked at people like David Levin, who had a passionate, unwavering commitment to a single mission. She decided this quality needed its own name, and she called it grit. Grit, as she defines it, is the tendency to sustain passion and perseverance for long-term goals. She developed a simple 12-question grit scale to measure it. And she found that this scale was remarkably predictive of success in all sorts of challenging environments. At West Point Military Academy, a cadet's grit score was a more accurate predictor of whether they would make it through the grueling beast barracks training than the military's own complex evaluation system. Another crucial character strength is conscientiousness. This is the quality of being careful, diligent, and hard-working. It's the trait that makes someone try hard on a boring task even when no one is watching and there's no immediate reward. An economist named Carmit Siegel demonstrated this with a mind-numbingly simple coding speed test, where people had to match words to 4-digit numbers. She found that people who tried hard on this boring, low-stakes test, the conscientious ones, earned significantly more money 2 decades later. Their conscientiousness was a powerful predictor of life success. So if these character strengths are so important, how do we teach them? The story of a chess team from a low-income middle school in Brooklyn, IS 318, gives us a powerful clue. For years, the world of scholastic chess has been dominated by kids from wealthy private schools and elite exam schools. But in the middle school grades, one name kept showing up at the top of the national championship rankings: IS 318. A public school where over 60% of the students were from low-income families. This wasn't a fluke. They won in all three grades, year after year, beating teams from the most exclusive schools in the country. The secret to their success was their teacher, Elizabeth Spiegel. What Spiegel taught wasn't just chess strategy. She was teaching her students a new way to think. Her method was relentless and, at times, brutally honest. After every single game, win or lose, each student had to come back and do a post-mortem with her. She would replay their games, move by move, and force them to confront their mistakes. When one student, Sebastian, made a careless move just 4 moves into a game, she didn't hold back. "This is pathetic," she told him. "We did not bring you here so that you could spend 2 seconds on a move." It sounds harsh, but there was a profound lesson in her method. She was teaching them to analyze their own thought processes, to understand why they made a mistake, and to find better alternatives. This process is uncomfortable. As Spiegel says, it's uncomfortable to focus so intensely on what you're bad at, but it's the most effective way to improve. She was teaching them to take responsibility for their failures without letting those failures define them. "Losing," she would say, "is something you do, not something you are." Spiegel was, without using the words, teaching them grit, self-control, and a kind of productive pessimism. Expert chess players, researchers have found, are not necessarily better at calculating moves than novices. What they are better at is falsification, the ability to look for evidence that contradicts their own ideas. While a novice will find a good-looking move and only see the ways it can succeed, a tendency called confirmation bias, an expert will actively search for the hidden dangers, the ways their brilliant plan could go wrong. Spiegel was training her students to have this expert mindset. She was teaching them to slow down, to inhibit their first, impulsive response, and to think more deeply. In other words, she was building their executive functions through the game of chess. And in doing so, she was giving them the character strengths they would need to succeed far beyond the chessboard. This brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. We've seen that character is more important than cognition. We've seen that a stressful childhood can damage the biological systems that support character. And we've seen that character strengths like grit and self-control can be taught. So, can this knowledge be scaled up? Can we create a system that helps thousands of students develop these skills and navigate the difficult path to success? This is the mission of a man named Jeff Nelson and his organization, One Goal. Nelson was a young, idealistic teacher in a high-poverty Chicago school. He was getting great academic results in his classroom, but he was haunted by a statistic he read in the newspaper. Only 1 in 30 black male high school freshmen in Chicago would go on to graduate from a 4-year college. He realized that even the best 6th-grade teacher couldn't overcome those odds alone. He decided to create a program designed to close the gap between high school and college. One Goal identifies underperforming high school sophomores who show a spark of ambition and enrolls them in a 3-year program taught by one of their own teachers. The program has 3 parts. First, intensive ACT prep, which helps students raise their scores significantly. Second, a roadmap to college, which guides them through the complex world of applications, financial aid, and choosing the right school. But the heart of the program is the third element, teaching the non-cognitive skills and character strengths needed to succeed in college. Nelson identified 5 leadership principles that the program focuses on: resourcefulness, resilience, ambition, professionalism, and integrity. One Goal operates on a powerful theory. They know that most of their students will arrive at college academically behind their wealthier peers. But Nelson believes that freshman year is a magical time frame. While many more privileged students are coasting, partying, and adjusting to their new freedom, one-goal students have been trained to do the opposite. They are taught to be diligent, to build relationships with professors, and to use the very skills of resilience and resourcefulness that they've been practicing. In that 1 year, if they work hard, they can radically close the achievement gap. And this is where we come full circle, back to Quanah Lerma. She was one of the students in that one-goal program. Despite her incredible turnaround in high school, her ACT score was still a 15, placing her in the bottom 15th percentile nationally. By some measures, she wasn't college material, but her GPA was nearly perfect, a testament to her incredible conscientiousness and grit. She was accepted to Western Illinois University. Her first semester was a struggle. In her biology class, the professor used scientific terms she had never heard before. So she came up with a strategy. Every time she heard a word she didn't understand, she wrote it down with a red star next to it. After class, she would wait until every other student had left, and then she would go through her list with the professor, one by one, asking him to explain each word. She went to office hours. She found a writing tutor. She stayed up all night studying for finals. And at the end of that first semester, her hard work paid off. She earned 2 B+, 1 A, and in biology, an A+. By the end of her freshman year, her GPA was a 3.8. Quanah's story is the living embodiment of everything we've talked about today. She was participating in a high-stakes version of the marshmallow test, sacrificing immediate gratification for a distant, almost abstract prize, a future she had only ever dreamed of. She didn't know any college graduates besides her teachers. She had faith that the struggle was worth it. And her success wasn't due to some innate, fixed intelligence. It was due to her character. The grit, the resilience, the resourcefulness, these were the skills that were carrying her up the mountain to a better life. Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through How Children Succeed, it's hard not to feel a profound sense of both hope and urgency. The central message of this book is a powerful one. The path to a successful and fulfilling life is paved not just with intelligence, but with character. For a long time, we've told ourselves a story about success that was simple, but wrong. We believe that some people are just born smarter, and that this innate ability is what determines their destiny. It's a convenient story, because it lets a lot of us off the hook. If success is all about genetics and IQ, then there's not much we can do for those who are struggling. But the science that Paul Tough so brilliantly weaves together tells a different story. It tells us that the skills that truly matter, grit, curiosity, self-control, optimism, are not fixed. They can be learned. They can be taught. They are shaped, in powerful and predictable ways, by the environments in which we grow up. This is an incredibly hopeful message. It means that a difficult start in life does not have to be a life sentence. The damage caused by early stress and adversity is not irreversible. Through nurturing relationships, through thoughtful interventions, and through the dedicated work of parents, teachers, and mentors, we can help children build the character strengths they need to thrive. The stories of Quanah Lerma, James Black, and the students at KIPP and IS 318 are not miracles. They are the result of a process. A process of learning how to manage failure, how to delay gratification, and how to persist in the face of daunting obstacles. So, what can we take from this? How can we apply these lessons in our own lives, right now? First, we can begin to see failure differently. Instead of something to be feared and avoided, we can see it as an essential part of learning and growth. The next time you face a setback, try to approach it like Elizabeth Spiegel's chess students. Don't just move on. Analyze it. Understand what went wrong and why. Ask yourself, what's the lesson here? What could I have done differently? This kind of honest self-reflection is the engine of improvement. Second, we can focus on building one character strength at a time. Pick one of the 7. Maybe it's grit, maybe it's self-control, maybe it's curiosity. For the next month, make it your focus. Read about it. Practice it. Notice when you use it and when you don't. Character is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. And finally, we can recognize the immense power we have to shape the lives of the young people around us. Whether you are a parent, a teacher, a coach, or just a friend, the simple act of providing a secure, supportive, and challenging environment can have a profound and lasting impact. We can be the high-LG parents, the nurturing caregivers who buffer children from the storms of life and give them the confidence to explore the world. That was a summary of How Children Succeed by Paul Tough. We've journeyed through the core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map of the territory. The real treasure is found when you walk the path yourself. The true power of this book is in the depth of its stories and the richness of its science. This summary is designed to give you a taste, to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or given you a new way to think about success, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's an experience that can genuinely change how you see yourself, your past, and the future you are capable of building. Also, if you found this summary valuable, I would be so grateful if you would hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.